doing so. So you said, could it be done without your consent? No, it couldn't be done without your consent. You also referenced the issue of contact lists, and this is covered in one of the recitals to the GDPR, and it is an area of the law that we do intend to look further at, because what the recital clarifies under the GDPR, and this happens with all platforms and all internet service providers, they allow users optionally upload the contact lists on their phone to be managed within the internet service as a facilitation to the user. And what the recital in the GDPR spells out quite correctly is that the uploading of the contact lists from your phone is done under the so-called household exemption under data protection laws. So you're acting under household exemption. The full laws don't apply to you in terms of uploading the list. But the further uses and processing of that contact list by the platform or any controller does require a legal basis. So I'm not sure if you're bringing to our attention that you're aware of a platform making further use, and we'd be interested to receive that information if you have it. In relation to your last question on data surveillance, GCHQ, post-Brexit, in the first instance, the EU Commission will be required and has already been pushed by the UK in relation to some type of mutual recognition of the UK as having an adequate level of data protection. Assuming there's no such mutual recognition of the UK would undoubtedly seek an adequacy finding from the EU Commission, and it will be the role of the EU Commission to conduct a full analysis in the context of making an adequacy finding in relation to the UK, and we'll cooperate in that process. So I think, was it Deputy Lawless? Sorry, Deputy Lawless was next. So again, you talked about Cambridge Analytica. Just to mention that, of course, 300,000 users directly engaged and gave their consent to download the app. So the issue, if it transpires to be true of Dr. Kogan passing the data to Cambridge Analytica, that would have occurred anyway, minus the friend data, had that been restricted. And so current supervision activity that Joanne is undertaking with Facebook is around, regardless of whether friend data was accessed or not, how Facebook are vetting apps, how they are controlling what permissions they give apps, and what examination they're doing of the privacy policy proposed by an app developer. In relation to the issue of warrants, we have very strong powers already to enter premises. We conducted almost 100 on-site inspections and investigations last year. Some of those have been done, raids conducted by Assistant Commissioner Tony Delaney in relation to a series of prosecutions he's taken around private investigators. Our powers in that area are further strengthened under the new Irish Data Protection Bill. We have the same powers to enter premises, but we'll also have the ability to go to the District Court to obtain a warrant if there's any objection from any controller to our entry onto premises. We haven't encountered that scenario so far, so we are confident in relation to those powers. You asked then about the level of readiness of industry with the GDPR. You'll be aware that our office has undertaken a huge awareness campaign, in particular in the last 12 months. We surveyed industry, and in particular SMEs and micro enterprises, a year out from the GDPR. We saw a high level of awareness of the new laws, a lot less preparedness for the new laws. We're rerunning that survey at the moment and should have the results of it next week, so we can keep you updated in relation to that. In terms of the huge number of events we've spoken at, the type of representative bodies like the SFA that we've engaged with, we believe there's been huge engagement in Ireland in relation to the GDPR, and there is actually a very high level of awareness. There are still some areas where I think organisations aren't fully prepared. They're around some of the new areas under GDPR, particularly in relation to delivering higher standards of protection to children. This is an area with which we haven't seen probably the amount of engagement that we would want to so far. So in relation then, Senator McDowell, to your questions, So you asked if somebody from Northern Ireland wanted to influence. So they could seek to influence either offline or, or online. So your question was related to online and in relation to data protection issues around that. So I can't speak as to what electoral laws would apply, presumably financing and transparency from whoever was funding in terms of making a declaration as to the funding. But in relation to targeting online, yes, such an entity could purchase advertising with Facebook and target based on segments. Yes, yeah. So clear opportunities to opt out. I think the opportunities aren't clear enough. We've been having the same discussion since I became the Data Protection Commissioner. Those who are in the data protection business longer than I am say we've been having the same discussions for 10 or 20 years. This is why Viviane Reding has said the time has come for punitive fines and a new and modernised fit-for-purpose law, which we'll have from next month. But I think aside from clear opportunities to opt out, this issue that I mentioned earlier of free internet services based on a monetising of personal data, the way in which the whole ad tech sector operates, there is a need to unravel and look behind that whole sector, because of course in data protection terms, any publisher, any newspaper that's using social plugins and is dropping third-party cookies from its website is the controller in those instances and has obligations under the law. And so this is what we have started to talk to our fellow data protection authorities about. As we supervise the platform and its responsibility, there's a need to take on looking at all of these other players in a sector that has a very long tail that leads to opaqueness for users.
To cut you off there, but what we'll do is send you a transcript of the questions that were posed by the members of the committee and people here today, and if you could give us a written reply to those questions. And I want to thank you both for coming here before us and giving us such a comprehensive reply to our questions here today. So on behalf of the committee, I'd like to thank you and for coming before us. And the committee will publish the opening statements and presentations received to the committee webpage. Is that agreed? So I now will suspend the meeting to allow the witnesses to exit, and we will resume in public session. Thank you. I wish to draw your attention to the fact that by virtue of Section 17(2)(l) of the Defamation Act 2009, witnesses are protected by absolute privilege in respect to their evidence to this committee. However, if you are directed by the Chairman to cease giving evidence in relation to a particular matter and you continue to do so, you are entitled thereafter only to a qualified privilege in respect of your evidence. You are directed that only evidence connected with the subject matter of these proceedings is to be given, and you are asked to respect the parliamentary practice to the effect that, where possible, you should not criticise or make charges against any person, persons or entity by name or in such a way as to make him, her or it identifiable. I also wish to advise you that any submission or opening statements you've made to the committee will be published on the committee website after this meeting. Members are reminded of the long-standing parliamentary practice to the effect that they should not comment on, criticise or make charges against a person outside the Houses or an official, either by name or in such a way as to make him or her identifiable. I just remind members and witnesses to turn off their mobile phones or to put them into flight mode as they interfere with our sound system. I'd like to welcome our witnesses here today, and I propose that the main witnesses will speak for no more than 5 minutes, if that's possible, and if you wish to share your speaking time, you might indicate that in advance. Is that agreed? Yeah. I'm going to call on Deputy James Lawless first to invite you to give a brief overview of your bill. And if you could keep it within 5 minutes, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome to Joel and Niamh from Facebook for joining us before the committee today. Because it's the first hearing of the scrutiny of my online advertising social media transparency bill, I'm going to give a brief outline of the bill for the committee and for all interested parties before we move into the Facebook engagement. The Irish Electoral Acts were written largely in 1992 and have seen little updates since then. That was 1992 was before internet, before broadband, and certainly before social media. And as such, they do not cover, as stands, the online space at all. The Broadcasting Act is an anomaly in the sense that political advertising on TV and radio is actually prohibited completely. So we have a situation where we have governance on paper materials, on posted election posters, a complete ban on TV and radio, and yet a total vacuum exists in the online regulating space. The BAI has said that online advertising, social media advertising is out of scope. SIPO has said they don't have a role under current legislation. The Data Protection Commissioner has an interest in personal data but not in political online campaigning. And the Referendum Commission for the upcoming referendum have said that online campaigning is out of scope for them as well. So we have a situation where the internet remains the Wild West electorally. The reason why funding of political campaigns has always been regulated is because of the fundamental principle that democracy should not be available to the highest bidder. Spending limits, campaign monitoring, governance of fundraising, the ban on TV advertising all subscribe to this basic principle that it should be a level playing field as much as possible and that anybody can compete at the entry level in politics. Again, none of this applies online, and as we've seen in recent elections around the world, in the US, in Brexit, and in many other jurisdictions, it has been possible, and indeed with Cambridge Analytica, it has been possible to enter the online domain, spend an awful lot of money, and disproportionately affect the outcome of elections using very sophisticated techniques. It is important that we move to manage that gap in Ireland. The bill I introduced to first stage in the Dáil, I passed second stage vote before Christmas, seeks to do a number of things to regulate that. It does embrace online advertising. It sees it as a good thing. It sees political advertising online as being democratising to some extent. There's a low barrier to entry, but it seeks to put transparency front and centre of any political advertising. It requires a transparency notice where the advertiser would have to state who they are, who the publisher is, who the sponsor of the ad is, and if a targeting algorithm has been applied, it requires that to be said as well. There's a ban on bots where multiple fake accounts try to artificially promote a particular viewpoint. They can bombard somebody to make something appear unpopular, or they can multiply something to make it appear very popular, but they skew the online discourse in a way, again, that is negative to our democracy. I've engaged with the bill with many civil society groups, including the NUJ, the ICCL, Amnesty, Uplift, the Transparent Referendum Initiative, who have all been broadly supportive of the bill and the measures within it, and see this as being a very important piece of legislation, and certainly the measures within it. And I want to thank Facebook, who engaged with at the outset, even last year, on this, have found to be very cooperative and collaborative, and very keen to see these kind of measures implemented as well. And also Twitter, Google and the other social media platforms have been involved. I think the bill is needed. I think there's a broad consensus among the technical sphere and amongst the civic society sphere that it's needed. The government remain ambiguous on it. I hope they will come around. I think they will. Parliamentary legal advice the bill is relatively solid, bar maybe one or two tidy up amendments. The view from civic society and elsewhere is that it's needed. So I think we just need now to get on with it. And this is our first engagement. I look forward to the session ahead. And I know the committee will be arranging further engagements with other witnesses over the next number of weeks and months. So I think it's a matter of when, not if, the bill becomes law. But again, welcome to the witnesses today from Facebook, and I look forward to the engagement.
Thank you very much, Deputy. And I'd like to now take the opportunity to welcome Mr. Joel Kaplan, Vice President of Global Policy at Facebook, who's accompanied by Niamh Sweeney, Head of Public Policy with Facebook Ireland. And if you'd like to make your opening presentation to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, members of the committee, I'd like to thank the committee for asking us to be here today to talk about the events that have come to light in recent weeks and the steps we're taking to address them. Niamh and I are also accompanied by Gareth Lamb, Vice President and Head of Facebook Ireland, Richard Allen, Vice President for Policy in EMEA, Eva Nagel, Regulatory Counsel, and Claire Rush, Content Counsel. Niamh, Gareth, Eva, and Claire are all based here in our international headquarters in Dublin. I want to start by echoing our CEO, Mark Zuckerberg. What happened with Cambridge Analytica represents a huge violation of trust, and we are deeply sorry for it. We now serve more than 2 billion people around the world who use our services to stay connected with the people that matter to them most. We know we have a responsibility to the Facebook community, and that people will only feel comfortable using our service if their data is safe. As our second largest office globally, Facebook Ireland plays an important part in providing that service, with over 2,500 people working across multiple teams at our international headquarters in Dublin Docklands. As Facebook has grown, people everywhere have gotten a powerful new tool to stay connected to the people they care about, make their voices heard, and build communities and businesses. But it's clear now that we didn't do enough to prevent these tools from being used for harm as well. We didn't take a broad enough view of our responsibility, and that was a mistake. I won't repeat the detailed timeline in my written statement, but will highlight some key points. We made some big changes to Facebook platform in 2014 to restrict the amount of data that developers can access and to proactively review the apps on our platform. This means that today a developer can't do what Kogan did 4 years ago. In 2015, when we learned Kogan had shared the data, we banned his app from our platform and demanded all improperly acquired data be deleted. Last month, when we learned from the media that Cambridge Analytica may not have deleted the data as they had certified, we banned them from using any of our services. Most of the people impacted by this were predominantly in the United States. However, as you heard from Commissioner Dixon, we understand that 15 people in Ireland installed Kogan's app, and up to 44,687 people in Ireland may have been friends with someone who installed the app and therefore may have been affected. We are notifying all of those people. We have a responsibility to make sure what happened with Kogan and Cambridge Analytica doesn't happen again. As a result, we're limiting the information developers can access using Facebook login, and we're putting additional safeguards in place to prevent abuse. We're also in the process of investigating every app that had access to a large amount of information before 2014. If we find that someone is improperly using data, we'll ban them and tell everyone affected. We're making it easier to understand which apps people have allowed to access their data, and turning off the access to information of any app they haven't used in 90 days. We've expanded Facebook's bug bounty program so that people can also report to us if they find misuses of data by app developers. We know there's a lot of work to do here and that this is just the beginning. Over the past 4 weeks, we've been cooperating with Commissioner Dixon and her office as our lead regulator, as they have sought to establish what happened and how Irish and EU users may have been affected by Cambridge Analytica. We've shared detailed information with them about our past and current practices, and we continue to engage with them on this. I want to speak frankly. The Data Protection Commissioner has been critical of us in recent weeks. We recognize and understand those criticisms. We could and should have done better in responding to concerns, and we're committed to doing better going forward. Under the GDPR, which takes effect on the 25th of May, Commissioner Dixon and her team will become our lead supervisory authority. Transparency is a fundamental requirement of the GDPR, and our teams have been working hard for the past 18 months to make key changes to our products that will give our users greater control over their data and visibility as to how they can exercise that control. We take the GDPR very seriously. It places additional requirements on companies, and that's a good thing. We need to rebuild trust with our users, and complying with the GDPR is critical to that. We've been working with the DPC on our final products, and we welcome the time invested by that office in ongoing engagement with Facebook and the feedback we've received on our GDPR implementation plan. Finally, I'd like to comment on the online advertising and social media bill. Deputy Lawless, I know that you met with our team when you first proposed this bill. We very much appreciate that you look to engage with us on this from the outset. We fully understand and appreciate what your bill is trying to achieve and are aligned with its goals. It mirrors in large part what we are trying to achieve with the new ads transparency tools that we have announced. We agree that when it comes to advertising on Facebook, people should be able to see all the ads that a page is running, and when it comes to political ads, all advertisers should be verified, and any ads that they run should be clearly labeled to show who paid for them. We're working hard to build out these transparency tools and to roll them out globally, but it does take time to do that, and most importantly, to get them right. I am able to report to the committee today that as of April 25th, we will add Ireland to our pilot program for the first phase of our transparency efforts, the View Ads tool. This will enable Irish users to see all of the ads every advertiser is running on Facebook at the same time. We hope that this will bring greater transparency to ads running in the context of the forthcoming referendum on the 8th Amendment. I'm sure you'll have comments and questions about all these issues, so I will stop there, Chair, and just say thank you again for inviting us to be here.
Thank you very much for your contribution. So I'll start with a number of questions with my own first. You might just record the questions as I go through the members, and I'll come back to you at different intervals. Thank you. So I asked the Commissioner this question earlier. So just in relation, you say that in 2014 you announced that you were changing your platform to significantly limit the information that apps could access based on recommendations of the Data Commissioner, and those recommendations were made in 2012. Can you explain why you delayed putting in place those changes for over 2 years? It wasn't until 2014 that those changes were made. Also, you say that in 2015 you learned from journalists in The Guardian newspaper that Mr. Cogan had shared data from his app with Cambridge Analytica, and that sounds like you very much appreciated that information. If you read The Economist this week, they state that you threatened to sue The Guardian if they published the story. So that sounds very much like you were valuing your own corporate reputation over the user's privacy rights. And I'd like you to comment on that. Also, would it be fair to say that you only took this matter seriously after The Guardian published the story and you came under intense public scrutiny? And you say that in 2015 that Cogan shared the data from his app with Cambridge Analytica, so you banned Cogan's app from your platform and demanded Mr. Cogan and all the other entities he gave the data to, including Cambridge Analytica, to confirm that they had all deleted this data. But did you ever check or confirm that that had happened? Because you say that only last month you learned that the data may not have been deleted. And can you confirm that this data was not shared with other parties prior to being deleted, if it was? Thank you. I'm going to bring in Deputy Dooley next. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks Mr. Kaplan and Ms. Sweeney for being present. Just a couple of comments first. Just looking at the presentation that you've given to the committee prior to just what you've said, just maybe ask you to address one or two things. And you said that, in addition to what your CEO said last week, that Facebook's an idealistic and optimistic company. And you went on to say, but that it's clear now that we didn't do enough to prevent these tools from being used for harm as well as good. We didn't take a broad enough view of our responsibility, and that was a mistake. So you're kind of making the presentation almost like, as we might say in Ireland, you're looking for the fool's pardon. You've been somewhat naive. You're almost the victim. You've been taken advantage by these app developers. Could I just read into the record a memo which you'll be well familiar with? It was one which was circulated internally in your company by one of your senior vice presidents, Mr. Andrew Bosworth. And I'll just quote some sections of it rather than go through it in detail. But it says, we connect people, so we connect more people. That can be bad if they make it negative. Maybe it costs a life by exposing someone to bullies. Maybe somebody dies in a terrorist attack coordinated on our tools. The ugly truth is that we believe in connecting people so deeply that anything that allows us to connect more people, more often, is de facto good. It is perhaps the only area where the metrics do tell the true story as far as we are concerned. That's why all the work we do in growth is justified. All the questionable contact importing practices, all the subtle language that helps people stay searchable by friends, all of the work that we do to bring more communication in, the work we will likely have to do in China someday. And then it goes on, the best products don't win. The ones everyone uses win. We do not have great products, but we do have great products, but we still wouldn't be half our size without pushing the envelope on growth. Nothing makes Facebook as valuable as having your friends on it, and no product decisions have gotten as many friends on as the ones made in growth. No photo tagging, no news feeds, no messenger, no nothing. So you're familiar with that, I'm sure. It's been well circulated in the media now. I do accept that it was written back in 2016, which is 2 years after the 2014 watershed, which you talked about as having sought to address a lot of your concerns. When did Mr. Bosworth leave the company? Or when was he fired? If you could identify that for us, or if he's still with the company. It seems to me that if you read that as it's scripted, it speaks to a DNA within your company of effectively pushing that envelope of growth over everything else. Now, if I could just move to some issues then around the data. Facebook make a lot about the fact that the user owns the data, and you talk about that. So my understanding of this, and maybe you can help me with this, my understanding is any data that I put onto my page or my Facebook, I own that and I have control over it. But there's a second set of data, and the Data Commissioner confirmed for us earlier that you do track individuals when they leave your site. So there's a data set there, I assume. There's something that you capture on my activities or on the user activities once they leave the Facebook environment. Who owns that data? Where's that stored? Can you provide me with my data in relation to that or to users' data generally? And if so, is that made readily available? So the two sets, who owns it? Who owns the second piece? Where's it stored? And is it available? It's been identified for us that you do track people once they leave Facebook. Do you think you should be allowed to continue to do that? Is that something that should be a regulated practice? Is it something we should look at regulating and prevent? And whilst I raise this issue with you, because you're here, I accept that you're one of many. Others effectively do the same thing. It's a competitive marketplace, and you've got to stay with the flow. We looked earlier at, and there was a sort of a discussion about opt-in, opt-out, and I know Deputy Ryan focused on that. From here on in, should it be very clear that when a service is available that facilitates you providing the service that is Facebook through advertising, which you do without the provision of a paywall, we accept that, and you've got to make money. It's got to stack up there. But should there be an opt-in window? From here on, should it be any service that's provided that allows for my accessing all that information for free per se, that I know what I'm opting into? I know what I'm getting into. I know where my data goes. I know what data goes, what it's likely to be used for, what silo it's going into to predict for me what might happen in the future. Then I think you bring transparency to the whole interaction between user and company. And then we don't have these concerns about what nefarious activities are going on beneath the bonnet. Thanks very much.
Thank you. I might bring you in on those to answer those questions before I bring in other members. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair and Deputy Dooley. Starting with the Chair's questions, why the delay between recommendations made in 2012 and the action to lock down the platform in 2014? First of all, I just would like to say that I think the bottom line is we did take too long, and that's one of the mistakes that I think we've made here. But I do think it's important to put it in context as well, and Commissioner Dixon talked about this at some length. The audit that we went through in 2011 and the follow-up in 2012 was quite comprehensive. We received something on the order of 60 recommendations that required a response from Facebook, and in many instances significant modifications to our service. This was one of the issues that was raised. We did provide some additional education and a change in the placement of the controls for users to choose whether they wanted to share, allow someone to share their information with an app developer, but ultimately concluded after 18 months or so that we should just turn it off. We should just turn that capacity off. I do wish we had come to that conclusion sooner, but it was, as the Commissioner said, something of an iterative process. When it comes to the 2015 Guardian, when it comes to, I think the next question was when we, what action did we take when we learned of it in 2015? We did move immediately to ban Kogan, to ban Kogan's app from the platform, and to demand of him and anybody, or demand of him and anyone that he gave the data to, that they delete the data. And we were told relatively quickly by Cambridge Analytica that they had complied and deleted the data. But you've hit immediately on another place where I think we did not do as well as we should have, which was we took their word for it that they had deleted the data, and we shouldn't have done that. We should have pursued with an audit, which we're undertaking now as soon as the ICO permits us. And we should have notified the people who were affected. We're now taking all of those steps. I wish we had taken them in 2015. We're taking them not only with respect to Cambridge Analytica, but we're going back and looking at all of the apps that are similarly situated, meaning they had access to large amounts of data prior to the change to platform in 2014. We're now going back and looking at all of those apps, seeing if any of them are engaging in any types of suspicious activity, and if they are, we'll conduct a full audit, and if they've misused our data, we'll tell the people affected. Let's see, and I think that answer, I hope, Chair, that answers your questions as well about whether we ever confirmed or checked in 2015, and the answer is we did not. We received assurances, and we should have checked.
We'll be doing this in the future. I suppose from the public's point of view, it's to know that their data is protected, and this is not just a retrospective review or audit, that the public can be assured who use your platform that their data will be protected in the future, that you'll put in these safeguards. That's
exactly right, Chair. We're doing that with all of the apps now that we're in the same position as Kogan's app. And we also have taken additional steps in recent weeks to further lock down the access by developers to the platform so that we don't recreate this kind of problem in the future.
And Deputy?
Yes, Deputy. Okay, so to the first question about Mr. Zuckerberg's comments and mine in my written statement, we do not believe we're a victim here. We believe we have a broader responsibility to the people who use Facebook. We made mistakes, as the Chair and I were just discussing. We want to make right on the mistakes that we made with respect to this app, but also go further and give the people who use Facebook the confidence that their data is safe. So no, we don't believe we are a victim in any way here. Andrew Bosworth's memo, Mr. Bosworth has not left the company and has not been fired. His memo, and Mr. Zuckerberg has spoken directly to this, did not reflect the company's values. Mr. Zuckerberg did not agree with it then, and he's been very clear that he doesn't agree with it now. With respect to the data, the online behavioral advertising, or rather the data that is collected when someone is logged out or is not a Facebook user, you're exactly right, Deputy, that is how the modern internet works, the architecture of the internet. When someone goes to a website, they will find present on that website code from a number of different sites. It could be Google, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook. When someone is logged out or is not a Facebook user, the data that we get transmitted back to us from that code is quite limited. It's mainly IP, the type of browser that you're using, things of that nature. We don't use that data for non-Facebook users. We don't use that data for advertising purposes. We don't associate it with an individual, with a unique user ID, and in most instances, we don't store it more than a few days.
So data in relation to a Facebook member now, rather than anybody else that might access a site. So a Facebook member accesses a site other than being within the Facebook platform at a particular time. So there's some data created which is connected to them through their Facebook connection. Is that data stored then with the profile of that individual in perpetuity?
I think this speaks to Assistant Commissioner Neary's description of how these interests or interest-based ads work. So you're absolutely right. You own all of the data that you share with Facebook. You can take it back at any time. You can delete it. That's something I try to stress every time we meet with stakeholders. There's also the additional data of the interest buckets that you would be, I suppose, would be appended to your profile. And we do provide, so you can download your information. So in other words, everything you've ever posted or shared with Facebook is all sitting in one place, and you can download it. You can port it under the GDPR. It's a new requirement to a different service. Or you can just go and look at it and see what there is. There's also your ads preferences, and that sits now within a new settings area on our platform. So again, one of the criticisms we've faced in the past, and we'd accept that, we needed to make improvements there, was that you had controls and settings, but they were sort of spread across the platform. We've brought them all together in one place now. So in the same place where you'll find download your information, which is everything you've ever shared with us, you'll also find ad preferences. And you can access that also from every single ad you'll ever see on the platform. And it shows you the interests we've appended to your profile based on some of your activity off platform if you haven't turned off third-party data. And you can change those, because we might get it wrong. Like, we get stuff wrong all the time. So if we say you're interested in Man United and fashion, you might say, really interested in fashion, but I'm not at all interested in Man United. That's just a guess.
Yes. Maybe both. But so taking that chunk of data, in Facebook's mind, who owns that data? The data that you've collected, tracking me rather than the information that I have voluntarily put up. So this is data that's it's tracking data, if you want, as much as anything else.
It's what's referred to as observed data. But if you decide you don't want your account to exist anymore, you want to take it away, that all goes with it. We don't keep that. So in a sense, you still own it, because if you decide to shut down your account, it's gone.
And so you provide that where somebody requests it?
Well, we provide it in your ads preferences, in the sense that it's not part of the download your information, because some of it would be commercially sensitive, let's say, in terms of how we bring that together, but it is accessible through the ads preferences. You can see all of the preferences that we'd append to your profile.
Talk about that commercial sensitivity bit for a minute.
Sensitive?
No.
Well, I mean,
it's just
I'm not an engineer, so I'm not going to speak to something where I can speak in theory rather than technical.
Maybe that's something you can provide to the committee, like we have Ms. Dixon coming back with information.
Thank you. Just one of my questions wasn't answered in relation to what appeared in The Economist this week, that you threatened to sue the Guardian newspaper if they published the article. Can you confirm that?
Yeah, my apologies for not getting that one, Chair. My understanding is that our lawyers objected to certain characterizations that the Guardian reporters were pursuing, and it was with respect to the characterization, a particular characterization, that they made that threat, not with respect to whether they should publish an article at all.
So you're saying that they didn't want the Guardian newspaper to publish this article. They threatened to sue them. Can you just expand on that again?
I'm sorry, Chair. I didn't mean to communicate that. What I meant to communicate was that they objected to a particular characterization in the article, but not the article itself.
They had no issue. Facebook had no issue with the Guardian newspaper publishing an article which stated that Kogan had shared the data app with his Cambridge Analytica
I think
and other entities.
the issue was the characterization of a data breach as a legal issue, and our lawyers disagreed with that. The important thing is, as Mr. Zuckerberg testified and has stated any number of times, this was a breach of trust under any circumstances, and we believe that our responsibility is to prevent that type of breach from happening.
Okay, thank you.
Second question, there was the opt-in piece, why you wouldn't look at from here?
Yes, Deputy. So first of all, I think, and Niamh should jump in if I don't have this correct, but I think the essence of your question actually will be reflected in the GDPR and our compliance with it. Getting the type of consent for online behavioral advertising and targeting is an important part of the GDPR's requirements, and our intent is to comply with that. So I'm hopeful that it will now evolve quite quickly in the direction that you laid out.
Deputy Stanley and then Deputy Smith.
Yes.
Thank you.
Firstly, just to thank the representatives of Facebook for coming in here today. I suppose, look, the questions are arising, I suppose, points to a situation, over the last decade, where we've arrived at, we're in contact with the whole world out there, I suppose, and it's, to date there hasn't been much regulation around it, and has been, I suppose, trial and error, and there have been abuses, and a bit Wild West, I suppose, without the sheriff. And now the sheriff arrives, but it's to try and get a grip on what's happening and to try and protect people. But just specifically in relation to the 87 million users, I mean, this is, I certainly was shocked by what I was reading about that. That their information had been utilised, and in the case of Ireland, there was just 15 people who had tapped into the app, and that affected over 44,000 citizens here, which just shows the multiplier effect, the ripple effect. But really, the investigation into that really came about because of the media in Britain, not because of any internal process that Facebook had in place, despite the fact that you had some, even though it's self-regulatory, which I disagree with, yet that there was some onus on you to take responsibility for that. The fact that you're holding all this data belonging to people. And that's just one question. Just to clarify that for me, please. Just around the whole commodity, the whole collection of information and the use of that. I mean, obviously, the business model is based on advertising and, collecting data that you can match up with advertising and match people up to that advertising. Isn't there always a danger then that can be the temptation is there to abuse that, and particularly in the political context, with the example of the last American election, and in the case of this island here, the effects of Brexit. But I mean, we're facing a referendum here on a matter that's, to put it mildly, is a fairly hot topic, and there'll be huge concern out there in relation to the manipulation of that. Now, you did mention in your open address that you were about to make some changes, and I would ask you to make those tomorrow. And particularly in relation to advertising, who pays for advertising? If I pay for an advertisement in the local press or wherever, it says, it's identified straight away. If a political poster on a lamppost, I have to say who the Director of Elections is on the bottom of it. It's a very, very simple thing. And I think that should be, I would, implore on you on Facebook to do that, because I think that, while people may argue whether it happened in Brexit or not, people may argue over whether it happened in the States or not, and we all have our own views about it, I suppose, at this stage. There's certainly a strong evidence to show that it did happen, but the jury is still out on those two. But here we are, here in this country, facing into this with 2.5 million citizens accessing Facebook every day, just in this part of the island alone. Almost 3.5 million throughout the full 32 counties. So just to clarify that, just in relation to social media, that we need laws, and that we need to develop a whole body of laws to protect the right and privacy, and to protect us against the power of the huge power that large corporations have now, and I suppose in particular to protect freedom of expression. in terms of your company, how rigid or how firm is the company in terms of your objection to very strict laws being brought in individual states, as opposed maybe to what happens one side of the Atlantic may be one thing, but what happens this side of it may be another. And the last issue I want to address is just in relation to fake accounts. This is a real issue, and if I go in tomorrow to to insure my car, I have to show down the owner of the car. If I go in to tax the car, I have to do the same thing. If I go in to open a bank account, I have to show identity. And it's a very basic thing that, I mean, I'm aware of a few fake accounts. I think somebody mentioned here that most of us here have been victims of fake accounts in political life at some time or another. And there's nothing wrong with people, I mean, social media can be very good platform, very good way of for citizens to participate. But I mean, there's huge abuse of it. There's the fake accounts. I'm aware of some that are put up there, putting out information against people who are in public life or about people who are in public life. There is absolutely no protection. And just related to that is the whole issue of at what stage does Facebook intervene and say, hang on here a second, what's put up there about X or about Y is beyond the pale, and we're going to intervene and take that down. Because I think that, in fairness, that people don't mind a bit of robust political exchange and of views, but I think when it oversteps that mark, and it takes away from the benefits that are there from social media. Thank you.
Deputy Smith.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for your presentation. Facebook is obviously a very profitable and global corporation that has huge say over the media and what people think and how they communicate with each other right across the globe, with over 2 billion of a community, as you call it. And your headquarters is here in Dublin, I assume, because you are able to make use of the transfer pricing and the various mechanisms which you allow you to offset your tax against R&D, for example. Ireland has been known for helping global corporations to portray what is actually not their real profit, but you'll already have priced away some of your profit, but you actually portray a lot of your profit as expenses, so you pay much less profit than you would in other countries. And so therefore, having your main office in Ireland, having it in Dublin, is really important to you to be able to avail of all of this. And so given that Facebook have made this massive profit out of people's personal data, I do get it that you're saying you're sorry and that you've made mistakes, but you've a big, I wish we have list in front of you of all the things that you've been asked about by the Chair and others. Why did this happen? How did that happen? And it's very difficult for political representatives like us to trust you, given your record and given this great Damascus conversion all of a sudden, that now you're not going to allow this happen again, and now you'll make sure there's full transparency, and now that data will never be used or abused in the way it has been in the past. It's really difficult for any of us to accept that on face value. I do welcome, however, that you have announced here now, it wasn't in your original presentation, which we received through the mechanisms of the Oireachtas, but you've announced here now that you are going to use the transparency tools, roll it out from the 25th of April here in Ireland. I really welcome that, because the implications of the misuse of people's personal data in the political context of the referendum that's taken place on the 8th Amendment on abortion rights in this country could still be very, very big indeed, seeing so that a lot of these advertising companies can prey on people's attitudes, their sexuality, has a lot of information that people don't realise, they still don't realise, that Facebook and others can gain about them just because they're advertising stuff. And political advertising in this way is totally unregulated as of now. It will be regulated, thankfully, after the 25th of May, the day of the referendum. So I do welcome the fact that you are allowing these transparency tools to be used here in Ireland. I think you should do it tomorrow rather than the 25th of May. But nevertheless, I think that it does indicate to us that you must recognise there's a problem with political advertising and the way that data is used to manipulate people's political ideas and responses, particularly if they, if they respond to shocking images or are sensitive to certain images, etc. So I'd like you to just comment on that. Do you recognise that as a problem? Why did you choose all of a sudden, when you didn't have it in your original presentation to us, that you were going to allow these transparency tools to be rolled out here in Ireland within the few weeks of the referendum? What changed your mind? Have you been coming under pressure for that, or why have you changed your mind to not just roll it out in Canada but roll it out here? Yeah, I think that's probably all, because a lot of the questions I would have asked have been asked. But I do think it should be noted that our concern here is that a former key employee of Cambridge Analytica is being used by the no side of the referendum campaign to do political advertising for them, and that has implications and concern for the independence of that campaign.
Thank you, Deputy Smith. I'll call on Senator Joe Riley, and then we'll go back to representative of Facebook.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. At the outset, if you'll indulge me for 30 seconds, I want to congratulate my colleague here on my right, Deputy Lawler, on his excellent and timely legislation. And I think in the context of this discussion, it's extraordinarily relevant. Might I, and again, may I welcome our guests, and could I just say at the outset that when in the celebrated hearings in the US, when your world CEO, if you like, Mark Zuckerberg, was asked by an Illinois Democrat, would he want the name of his hotel the night before to go into the public arena and where he stayed and whatever, and he said absolutely not, reasonably so. So I suppose that captured the difficulty that people face and how people feel. It's a very, very serious thing, and my questions will be common stroke questions, but they're nonetheless relevant, and I think none of us should fail to express this important view today. The use of data to manipulate or distort democracy is of horrendous consequences, and when you see where the failure or the breakdown of democracy, the shocking things that it's led to in recent times in Europe, etc., and indeed the absence of democracy in so many parts of the world, leading to awful horrors. So to break down democracy, to threaten democracy, even by these subtle, sinister methods, is of horrendous seriousness. And I think you have an extraordinary responsibility, given your access to 2 billion people in that regard. I mean, I would share Deputy Smith's point that she raises with you. I mean, it is very, very important that, and I know you're saying that you will put in protections, but I'd like you to come back to comment on that again, that people would be very clear that there wouldn't be, we want an open, transparent and sensitive debate in the upcoming referendum, and everybody aspires to that. But we need an absolute assurance, and the people watching this today need to know that there will be no distortion there, and that you can say to us convincingly there won't, and maybe you'd again explain in layman's terms, and to those of us who are less technological, how precisely that will be achieved and how people will be so assured of that. And again, the same applies to future elections. I understand that the commercial premise you function on is that you're providing names and information, and that you're providing a potential access for advertisers, and that's how you pay your bills. And that's a reasonable proposition. But at the same time, the fact that that could be distorted or used in a wrong way is not accessible. And could you tell me how you would be fit to get ways that people could be assured to stop the use of their data in an accessible, understood way for them, that they can, in a transparent way, prevent the use of their data? And I do think, and it was a point initially early raised, that we should have the option, and you do say that in the light of the GDPR you will be going down that road, but it would be very, very important that people would have the right to opt out. I don't, and of course I do want to say that the fake accounts, I mean, I personally in an election campaign was a victim of this, and I know very few of my colleagues who weren't, and thanks be to God I had the strength of mind and the capacity to deal with it and to not be affected by it, but I know some of my colleagues who had much more adverse effects from it. So the use of fake accounts is, and that's colleagues across the board, it doesn't relate to any ideology or party, it's people's or human sensitivities. I think the use of fake accounts is a horror, and it really, really needs policing. And I think people watching today need a very real reassurance on that score. And they also need a very real reassurance that any advertising coming to them, that they know where it's coming from, why it's coming, and particularly in the political case. It is the case that the local, as was cited earlier when the Commissioner was here, the radios, in the case of postering, there's names and sources and the Director of Elections or whoever is written on the poster. In the case of radio television, the Broadcasting Act, there's not specific political advertising in that sense. So, I mean, it's a shocking difficulty. There's nobody for a moment would suggest that you should